Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining this benQ webinar. Hope you're all doing well this evening. And over the next hour and a half or so, I'll be taking you through some of the photos I've captured recently over the past few years and my journey through photography. But first of all, I'd like to thank benQ for organizing this webinar and supporting me as a photographer. benQ has a range of really interesting products specifically designed for photographers, so I'd urge you all to have a look, because it's the monitor I'm using, the SW270C, has really changed my workflow for the better. So my name is Scicluna. I'm a landscape photographer based in the little island of Malta, and I've been capturing landscapes for about 5 or 6 years. I'll go through my story as we go through the webinar and show you some of the work from the very beginning up until very recently, just last weekend actually. And basically feel free to ask any questions at the end of the session as much as possible, and I'll get to your questions and be able to answer them. We'll be looking at various different areas around photography. So we'll be looking at equipment and planning, and then specific locations I've been to shoot. So Malta and Gozo, the place I live, Rome, Tuscany, the Dolomites, Iceland, and then a whole section on night photography and severe weather as well. And we'll close off with any questions and answers. So starting off with equipment, when it comes to photography, I think most people really enjoy investing in and always wanting to have the best equipment. I was also convinced that the equipment makes a huge difference to the quality of photos, but an unfortunate incident in Iceland in 2018 showed me that this isn't always the case, and I'll explain the story in a bit. But before we get into too much detail, I think with the current situation that the world is in, it's important for everyone to not be maybe spending all their money and investing in the newest equipment, but just trying to do the best with what you have. So the equipment I have, I've built over several years. Obviously, the current situation has led to me having more time on my hands than I planned. So earlier this year, this was my COVID project. I built drawers inside my wardrobe specifically for my camera equipment, just to keep everything sorted out. I also, not out of choice, but had to build a new computer just because mine decided to die on me. And down here is my current setup with my desk with the benQ SW270C that I use for editing my images. One second, because I just changed slide. So gear doesn't just cover camera equipment. There's a lot more to it, especially if you're into landscape photography and being outdoors. If you're camping, there's stuff you need to cook with, a tent, sleeping bag, mattress for you to sleep on. First aid kit is always really handy to have just in case. You hope you never need it, but it's good to have in case you do. Electronics, so with so many electronics nowadays, whether it's cameras, whether it's drones, you know, a tracker in my case, as I shoot astrophotography and I use a tracker to track the stars. Staying powered when you're off the grid is really important. So having a good power bank and the necessary cables to keep you going. And this is what my bag generally looks like when I'm off camping. I've got my tent, my tripod, and everything else, cameras, head torches, lenses, filters are all in the main pocket of the bag. This is just a different view of my equipment. It does vary depending on where I'm going and what I'm shooting, so it's not always going to be the same equipment. But this down here is what I alluded to earlier when I mentioned gear isn't always important. So on the first night on my trip in Iceland in 2018, while shooting the Northern Lights, my camera fell over with a strong gust of wind, fell off the tripod, and the lens completely pulled right out of the body. This is a Nikon D810, by the way, so completely destroyed my main camera, my workhorse, and I was forced to then use a crop sensor camera, which is about 5 or 6 years older than this, and a very cheap wide-angle lens. But as you can see from these images, you wouldn't necessarily tell that they were shot using entry-level equipment. So I'm talking about the cheapest wide-angle lens you can buy and a cheap camera. It wasn't without its challenges. So it was so cold on this trip that at one point the lens was actually frozen at f2.8. So this is a focus stacked image where I had to actually take 6 different shots focusing at different points to actually get everything I wanted to be sharp. This is Iceland in winter for you. Some really interesting foregrounds you can get with the ice, and this is a frozen lake. And the idea behind this image was trying to mirror Kirkjufell, the mountain, in the foreground, as I found these 2 lines acting as leading lines towards the mountain. This is Brúarfoss, which is a very famous waterfall almost in the center of Iceland. It's along the Golden Circle, famous for the beautiful blue color of the water. And again, this is not a high-end camera. This is the cheap entry-level Nikon D7200 I had at the time. So it really taught me a lesson that the equipment isn't everything, and you can still make a great picture if you don't have the best equipment. So don't be discouraged by not being able to maybe afford the best equipment right now. You can definitely get great results with what you have. So looking at planning, I just want to go into some detail around planning. Before I was into photography, I didn't really realize how much the azimuth, or the direction from which the sun rises and sets, changes throughout the year. So this is an example. This is the island I live on, which is Malta. If we look at the summer solstice, 21st of June, the sun rises in the northeast. The direction is northeast. So this yellow line shows us the direction the sun will be rising from, and it sets in the northwest. If we go to December, the 21st of December, so the winter solstice, the sun rises in the southeast and sets in the southwest. Now, because Malta's in the northern hemisphere, the sun is always going to be to the south. So in summer, the sun swings through the south, so rises in the northeast, swings across and sets in the northwest. And in the winter, it rises in the southeast, swings through the south, and sets in the southwest. Now, this variation in where the sun's position is what gives us the ability to shoot so many different locations. If the sun always rose and set in the same place, then we'd be very limited to the locations we could shoot from. But the fact that we have different locations gives us the ability to shoot loads of different compositions and different locations as well. So this is an example of planning a very specific shot. I won't forget this date because it actually happened on my birthday. It was a super blood moon, 31st of January 2018. And obviously I was aware that there was going to be a supermoon, and I wanted to get something which was very iconic and specific to Malta, which is the Valletta skyline. Valletta is our capital city. So I wanted to plan a shot where I'd get the rising moon and the city at the same time. So using this app called PhotoPills, which is the app I use for all my planning, I wanted to position myself in a place where I can take advantage of the position of the moon rising. And this is the result. So obviously a lot of planning, being on location about an hour early, just to be sure that I'm set up and everything's ready to go. And this is the final image. Another example, this is actually quite recent. So this is just 2 weeks ago. I was out on a Sunday afternoon chasing a storm. And as the storm dissipated, I saw it was going to be a really good sunset. So I headed to this location, which is in the northwest of Malta. It's called Eintufriha. And I've been to this place probably 50 or 60 times in the past 5 or 6 years. But I've never managed to get such a great sunset. So loads of color in the sky, beautiful warm tones. I specifically wanted the sun to be behind the tower so that I could avoid having the sun as the primary subject and just keep the tower as the main subject. And really happy how this photo turned out. But again, just by having a look at the app and planning, knowing where I needed to be, I could go to that location and be sure of what I was going to get. This is another example. So this is a beautiful location in the south of Malta. It's called Ras el Mijnuna. It's a natural sea arch. Now, unfortunately, this arch isn't actually accessible anymore, simply because the headland, which is where you access this arch from, if you see further up here, this headland's recently collapsed, so it's no longer accessible unless you go by sea, obviously. But this is really a story of perseverance. I've been to this location 7 or 8 times, hoping for a colourful sunrise like this, and each and every one was a complete failure. But finally, I got what was probably one of the best skies I'd ever seen. Incredible colours, the light reflecting off the rocks, and not just a great sky, but it was also quite a big swell, which meant that there was some amazing action and kind of movement of the water around the rocks, which really, I think, helps to give a more dreamy feel to the image. This is an example of using photopills to plan a Milky Way shot. So as you can see here, you put the pin wherever you're going to be standing, and these white circles are a representation of the Milky Way above your head. So each one of these concentric lines is 10 degrees. So in this case, you can calculate how far above your head the Milky Way is going to be. In this case, it would be like 80 to 90 degrees. Obviously, this would be further to the left, but I knew exactly where the Milky Way, the core would be, which is this big circle here, just over the tower. So obviously, I headed to this location and captured this. This is a tracked image. So I use a tracker for my astrophotography, and a tracker simply, if you've ever tried to shoot a long exposure at night, you notice that the stars start to trail, and because of the rotation of the Earth, what a tracker does is it rotates at the same speed as the Earth, but in the opposite direction to keep the sky from moving. So effectively, you're tracking the stars, you're moving with the stars. What that means is you end up with a blurred foreground. So I've taken a second exposure here just for the foreground, and then included those two together in Photoshop. When you're using a tracker, you need to generally take 2 different exposures, just because you're going to have, rather than the movement in the sky, you'll have movement in the foreground instead. Another example of planning the Milky Way here. So this is Blazin Mel, probably my favorite location. These boulders are absolutely massive. Probably about, I'd say this boulder is probably about 12 to 15 meters tall. Really interesting here, you can see, so this boulder here is this boulder, that's in the same position, but this boulder here is actually this one. So over winter with a massive storm, these boulders have moved around. When you see the size of these boulders and the fact that they're, you know, tens of tons, it's pretty impressive that the sea is able to move these around. But being an island in the middle of the Mediterranean, we do sometimes get a very significant swell when there's a big storm out to sea. So yeah, in this case, I wanted the Milky Way to be low to the horizon. It's a single shot. I didn't want to shoot a panel here. And you can see the arch of the Milky Way just hovering over the boulders. And this is a shot from last year I ran a workshop in Tuscany. I ran 2 workshops back to back, and one of the workshops coincided with a supermoon. So rather than focusing on sunrise, we came here to shoot the moonrise. This is about 45 minutes before sunrise. So you can see the nice blue tones of the blue hour just before the sun starts to warm up the sky. As you can see, this is shot on a very long lens to get the right perspective and to try and make the moon as big as possible. I was probably standing about 400 to 500 meters away from this chapel. So this is shot on a 300mm f4 lens with a 2x teleconverter. So it's effectively 600 millimeters. So a nice big zoom to try and get the detail in. This is obviously a sequence of very fast shots to get the perfect timing. You wouldn't want to risk just taking the one shot. So you get into position, you have an idea of how the moon is going to move, and you can use augmented reality on the app, which is the options down here, AR and night AR, and it will show you in real time where the moon will be moving. So you can position yourself, set up your tripod, and once you're 100% confident that you're in the right place, fire off you know, 10 or 15 shots to hopefully get one perfect shot right in the middle of the chapel in this case. So that's in terms of planning. Planning is extremely important in landscape photography. As you can see, I very rarely go out without having a plan, especially even when I'm traveling. I'll have all my locations planned, sometimes months in advance. I'll know exactly where I'm visiting. It's not a case of just going out and saying, oh, where should I go for sunset? I'd know each day what I've got planned for sunrise and sunset locations, specifically so that I can get the most of the trip and capture compelling images as much as possible. So after planning, so this is where it all started for me. In 2014, I already had my camera, but back then I wasn't really specifically into landscapes. I was pretty much shooting anything that came before me, which I think is what most of us do in the beginning when we get into photography. We have our camera with us and we try to take photos of everything and anything that comes in front of us. But this trip here was a trip to Mount Etna, an active volcano in Sicily. It wasn't specifically a photography trip. The trip was for us to climb Mount Etna to get to the summit, which we did successfully do. But that night, although there isn't active lava spraying out from a strombolian eruption, what we've got here is the actual clouds created by the smoke from the volcano being lit up by the lava beneath it, and it gave a really surreal red color, kind of as if it's actually lava coming out. But a few weeks later, there was a big eruption, so glad we weren't there at the time, but managed to capture this image. It's a night image. You can see here, there's also the constellation Orion in the right-hand side of the image right here. So that's where I got the mountain bug from. And the same guide who took us to Etna in July that year was planning a trip to climb Mont Blanc, the tallest mountain in Europe. So I took the decision to climb Mont Blanc. We spent 4 days on Monte Rosa first, which is, these pictures are all from Monte Rosa actually. And this is where I really started to see the power of kind of a sunrise, where you've got some incredible warm light coming into the scene and contrast throughout the scene. Again, these are all pretty much shot from the same location, Monte Rosa. The story after this, so we were on Monte Rosa to get acclimatized for Mont Blanc. Unfortunately, we never got our weather window, so we didn't actually make a summit bid. There was fresh snow, which just made it too dangerous for us to be able to attempt the summit. So this is really what got me started. Having seen these colors in the sky, being up in these amazing places, pretty much almost away from civilization, and seeing the raw beauty of nature was really inspiring. So I came back from that trip full of motivation to start shooting more locally, more sunrises and sunsets locally. Obviously, I couldn't travel all the time, so it's really important that you hone your skills locally, places close to you, so you can learn the basics and know exactly what you need to do. When you do get the opportunity to travel, then you can make the most of it. Really important to have those skills as opposed to trying to learn on the fly when you're away, because you'll just lose valuable time. So now looking at Malta and Gozo specifically. So this is a really one of my favorite sunrises I've had. It was halfway through a thunderstorm in the morning. Beautiful colors. You can see from the reflection here that it was pretty wet. There'd just been a massive rain shower, and quickly jumped out of the car, set up, and got the shot before another rain shower came in. But yeah, definitely one of those sunrises which just inspires you to go out again. This is what you always want to achieve when you're shooting landscape photography. You want these beautiful colors and fiery skies. This is another shot planned. It was a lunar eclipse, and this is the old fortified city of Indina in Malta. And again, so just like the one of Valletta, I wanted to time it so that the moon would be able to be visible in the shot, plus part of the eclipse as well. Another location I've probably visited 40 or 50 times. This is St. Peter's Pool in the south of Malta. And again, I visited this location again and again and never really got the conditions I was hoping for. So on this occasion, I really lucked out. Again, it was actually quite a stormy morning, and just after this, I ended up getting absolutely drenched. But you can see just the depth of colors in the sky, and the warm sunlight just about hitting the bottom of the clouds, setting them on fire, and then the deep core where there was a rain shaft just further into the clouds. And I think it's really important to have a calibrated monitor to make sure these colors are really true. So for example, I've printed this image, and having used the SW270C, the colors are exactly as they should be, both on the monitor and on the printer. So really, really important to make sure, you know, I'd say a monitor is more important than the camera you're shooting with based on my experience, just because there's no point in having the best camera and then your image not being an actual faithful reproduction of what you saw, or you think the colors look right on your monitor, but as soon as you see it on another screen, your phone for example, it ends up looking completely different. So really, really important to make sure you invest in the right equipment when you're looking to spend money, especially in the beginning. But yeah, definitely one of my favorite sunrises here. The contrast between the warm and cool colors is really impressive here. This is another famous landmark in Malta. It's called Blue Grotto. It's a huge sea arch, so there's probably 50 or 60 meters from sea level to the top of the arch. It's a very popular spot with tourists who've been to Malta, but it's a great winter sunset location. I say winter because you're pretty much facing southwest here, so managed to capture some nice color in the sky. There wasn't too much motion in the water, which I would have hoped there would have been. So if there was a bit more of a swell, there'd be a bit more drama and interest around the rocks. And then obviously I've used these two cactuses here as a foreground to kind of anchor the image. This is a recent sunset from Formulary. I'd spotted this rock stack and really wanted to try and get an interesting composition of it. I actually scouted this mostly for a Milky Way shot, but the day I was scouting, it turned out to be a fantastic sunset, so I took the opportunity to shoot it. An incredible sky. Try to include some foreground here. You've got the warm light hitting the rocks, but absolutely one of my favorite sunsets of this year. This is a colorful sunrise from the island of Goldzo. So Goldzo is just a sister island to Malta. It's just like a 20-minute ferry ride up. In fact, I just ran a workshop in Goldzo just this weekend. We had a really good group and got some interesting light, but didn't have this sort of color, unfortunately. But this is just what happens when you've got wet rocks and a colorful sky. The reflections just pick up that beautiful color. This is a sunrise from Cell Moon. Again, as you can see, I'm always looking for those fiery sunrises or sunsets, those warm tones. It really kind of adds that interest to the image. If we were to shoot this midday, all you're going to have is very harsh shadows and a bluebird sky. So really important to try and make the most of it. Make the effort to get out early and shoot a sunrise, because that's when you're rewarded with color. It's definitely not easy to always wake up early for a sunrise, but the results and the reward when it does all kick off is definitely worth it. This is a famous guard tower along the bastions in the south of Malta. So this is the peninsula with Valletta on, and this is called Il Guardiola, which is like a little watchtower from back in the time of the knights. So we're talking about almost 500 years ago. Recently restored, beautiful piece of art. We'd come here to shoot the fireworks festival, but ended up shooting this sunset, and I was a lot happier with this sunset than I was with the fireworks, to be honest. This is a place I mentioned earlier where I shot the Milky Way, Blazin Mel, a really interesting part of the Maltese coastline. Very dramatic, wet afternoon. The storm was just rolling in, but really interesting swell in the sea, good movement and contrast of colors between the warm light hitting the rocks and then the cool tones of the sea and the brooding clouds above. Another sunrise in Gozo. So this place is pretty much unknown, actually. It's very easily accessible and not many people have been here. So you get these really interesting boulders which are in very shallow water, which you can just walk around. On this occasion, the sun was rising to the right of this image. You can see the warm light coming in, but again, really nice contrasting colors between the warm and the cool part of the image. Now, this was shot on a camping trip, and again, I've printed this to put in my living room, and again, I'm just so happy with the colors and how faithful the print is to the actual image on the monitor. So these are salt pans where they collect salt, and this is way before sunrise, about 35 minutes before sunrise. There was a crescent moon here, and Mars in the sky, and you can see they have these beautiful leading lines. Again, warm limestone rock, really contrasts well with the salt pans. They're full of salt and they're reflecting the blue sky above, and that's why there's such a contrast in the colors there. This is another arch in Goldzo. Not the most famous of the locations, but definitely interesting. Again, if you've got some swell in the sea, you can really get some nice movement. And again, a colorful sky here to help contrast with the cooler tones of the foreground. This is Maria's Cave. I've been to this place several times to shoot the Milky Way. This was one of those times, but I went there early before sunset because I wanted to capture an image of the cave before it got completely dark. The sun's already set here. This is about 15 minutes after sunset, but I wanted to capture those warm tones of the light before they disappear. You can see the soft light on the entrance of the cave really brings out the detail in the rock. This is a recent, in May I went camping, so this is Blazin Mel, again, the same location I shot the Milky Way. I spent the night here in the hope of shooting the Milky Way, but ended up being really cloudy and actually drizzled, but sunrise in the morning was exceptional. So, you know, when you plan to go there and get a particular shot, at first I was disappointed about the not being able to capture the Milky Way, but I was 10 times happier when I caught this because it's definitely a unique image. This is not what you'd consider a sunrise location, just because the sunrise is actually right behind the camera in this case. So I was really lucky to have all the right elements here for the rainbow to show up and the warm light of sunrise to illuminate these clouds or patches of these clouds. This boulder itself is again probably, I'd say, 10 to 12 meters tall, and really interesting. I've got another shot later in the presentation, a Milky Way shot where I was standing on top of it, and you can just see how big this boulder really is. This is a relatively famous cave. It's the only cave in Malta which has fresh water in it, and there are lots of sea caves, but this is the only one which has fresh water. And further down, if so, they've recently explored the cave, and by diving they've noticed that below that there's also seawater as well. So it's got a layer of fresh water at the top, and there's a further cave which goes deeper and has seawater in it. Got my friend to pose here with a light just to give a sense of scale, because if that person wasn't there, you really wouldn't be able to tell how big this cave actually is. And you'll see in a couple of my images, I like to use a sense of scale just to show how big the image is. This is another sunset in Gozo, another really interesting location where you can get shallow water with boulders and work with the swell. Obviously, you need to be really careful when you're doing this because you can get a rogue wave which is bigger than others and almost carries you out to sea. So really happy with this image. It's one of the first images I captured in 2017. So going back a while, managed to capture some images I was happy with. This is the breakwater next to Valletta. Again, it's a sunrise shot. you can see it's a very long exposure, so the water smooths out and the sky is moving over. And it's these sort of shots where you've got that really nice glowing light, where having a monitor with with IPS technology really helps, because you can be sure that you've got the right amount of luminosity there and your highlights aren't like overexposed, for example. But yeah, just love the colors in this. And again, the contrast between the warm and the cooler tones. This is a shot from the west of Malta along these cliffs. There's a very famous cave here. Every couple of years, if there's a really good wet season, there'd be a waterfall coming down here over the cave. Unfortunately, it's not even yearly because we don't get that much rain in Malta. So that's on the bucket list to shoot. Once there is the water coming over the cliff, a little waterfall. It's one of the few waterfalls there are in Malta. Being a small island, the only water source we have is from the rain. So we don't have rivers and lakes, unfortunately. So on to Rome. In 2016, I traveled to Rome for the first time. It was a holiday with friends, but I took my gear with me. I was determined to be shooting sunrise and sunset. It wasn't very sociable of me, simply because whilst I was out shooting sunrise, well, if I was out shooting sunrise, they were still asleep, and when I was out shooting sunset, they were sitting having drinks at the bar. But this is a shot of the Colosseum. I'm sure it needs no introduction, but again, the contrast between the warm tones there and the cool tones in the sky just make the image 10 times better, in my opinion. This is Castle St Angelo, so a really famous castle along the River Tiber. And this is Ponte St Angelo, the bridge of St Angelo. And there are these different angels along the bridge. Again, this is shot in blue hour, so you can get the contrast between the warm lights, the artificial lights, and the blue in the sky. This is the Roman Forum. I shot this on a workshop in Rome last year in November, actually. And we got an incredible sky. In itself, the artificial light makes this image interesting, but having a really good sky definitely helps to bring out even more interest in the image. The Vatican, probably one of the most famous or reproduced images in all of Rome, is this shot down the river with the Vatican on the right. I waited for blue hour. This did happen to be in a thunderstorm. You can see everywhere is wet, the reflecting light there. It was a massive downpour, but managed to still get the shot. I had to cover my camera completely at times, but waited it out and got a really good sunset there. And on the final day, so we tried to view or take a picture of the Trevi Fountain around 3 or 4 different times throughout the trip. We tried going in about 10 o'clock in the morning, absolutely impossible, just packed with people. We tried going at like 4 in the afternoon, still didn't happen. Then we tried at 9 o'clock in the evening, just after dinner. We said probably everyone will be at home, and it was still packed. So the only solution was to go at 5:30 in the morning, before sunrise. You can see there's just about the blue in the sky from blue hour, before sunrise, and there were a couple of people, but just about enough that I could manage to remove the ones I didn't want in the shot. I wanted one person there to kind of help tell the story, and them admiring the work of art, because it is actually an incredible work of art. But yeah, so moral of the story, if you want to go to these places and get the shot, go early in the morning when everyone else is still asleep. Just wanted to I'm going to put a poll out there for you guys to respond to. And it's just a question, which is, have you ever attended a photography workshop before? Just want to get a feel for who in the audience has been on a photography workshop before. I'm just going to launch that now, so you can click yes or no to vote on that. And I'll keep it open for about half a minute. Okay, perfect. So I'll close that there. That's quite interesting. The majority haven't been on a workshop before. Um, Workshops are really interesting just because you get to spend time with like-minded people. You're there for a photography workshop. Inevitably, the conversation is constantly around photography. So you learn so much even before you start shooting. Just when you're at the dinner table talking to each other about photography and settings and equipment, you learn so much. So really, really interesting there. A lot of these images recently have been captured on workshops. So I'll just let you know when they are, just because I think it's interesting to know that. Cool. So we'll just continue with the presentation. So Tuscany, one of my favorite places in Italy. It's absolutely incredible, and it is just a landscape photographer's dream, to be honest. This is one of the most famous farmhouses in Tuscany, where you can get up to this high vantage point, and you've just got these beautiful rolling hills in the landscape. This is just after sunrise, the sun rising to the left here, filling in the scene. You can see the dark shadows there, adding some beautiful contrast and really bringing the image to life. I was lucky enough to run 2 workshops in Tuscany last year, back to back in March. So this is one of them. Commonly, you'd see this area filled with fog. We didn't actually have any fog or mist when we were there, but still the light was incredible and got some really good shots. Like this one. These cypress trees are really famous. There's actually a big lay-by where you can park on the side of the road just next to them to take the shot. I've shot these at sunrise, sunset, and in the middle of the night as well. They're just so interesting and photogenic. I've included the other 3 here just for a bit of balance, just so they're not completely put off to the side. But as you can see, no light in the foreground, but a beautiful sky just before sunrise. This is those same location on a stormy day. This is in the middle of a rain shower. You can see dark brooding clouds on the top. The sunlight coming in from the right had created some really interesting textures on the rolling hills, but there was definitely no color on that sunset. But doesn't mean that you can't shoot just because there's no color. So do keep that in mind. You can still shoot. A great landscape image when you've got dramatic clouds, and I'll show you some more examples of that a bit later. This is a really warm glow before sunrise, just a lone pine tree, an umbrella pine, I believe it is, in Tuscany. I wanted a simple composition here. I wanted to emphasize just the warm colors and the tree as it stands alone. This is another really famous farmhouse. It's got a beautiful winding road all the way to it. This isn't a great sunset, but I wanted to get a sun star where you'd capture the blades of the sun in the image. The sun was already too low, so there wasn't much light in the foreground, but at different times of year, as the sun sets in different locations, you can actually get some really interesting light in the image. And this is an example of that light, just a single lone tree here as the subject in the foreground. Again, the rolling hills, but you can see the shadow, the directional light, and how textured it is, the 3D lines and the texture in the image. Another shot, a single tree. I love the layers here, bits of light hitting the crests of these hills, and then just beautiful light bathing half the tree. It was side light in this case, all the sun coming from one direction, but really, really interesting. Now, just wanted to ask, we're obviously in the midst of a pandemic, which is very challenging for most people. So first of all, hopefully you're all right and it's not affected you as negatively as it has others. But just wanted to see kind of what I've got a list of 5 places here. I want to see where the first place you travel to of these 5 would be once things get back to normal. So I'm just going to launch that poll now, and again give you some time to complete that. Awesome. So I'll just close that off now. Wow. So it seems 44% of you guys would like to go to Iceland as soon as things get back to normal. So we'll get to Iceland in a second. I've been there 4 times already, and it is absolutely incredible, especially for landscape photography. But we'll definitely go through that. But good to see quite a lot of people want to go to Tuscany as well. I definitely recommend it, not just for the photography, but for the wine, the food. It's an absolutely incredible destination. So we're going to move on to the Dolomites now, which is even more than Tuscany. My favorite part of Italy is the Dolomites. Dolomites are a mountain range which stretch almost halfway across the north of Italy, and they border with like Austria and Slovenia. An incredible location, proper alpine mountains, you know, big walls. These are Trichime. They're some of the most famous, or the 3 peaks, one of the most famous climbing walls in the world, big wall climbing, about a 500-meter summit on Cima Grande. And this is a refugio. So these are the little huts, the refuges, which we actually stay at in the workshop. So this was captured on a workshop in the Dolomites last year. Can you imagine spending the night in this refugio and then waking up for sunrise? This is a sunrise shot in this incredible place. So in terms of using camera settings, so what camera settings have I used in this case? Whenever it's like a landscape scene, a sunrise or sunset, I'll generally use aperture priority instead of manual, just because I want to set a particular aperture, like for example f11 or f16 for maximum depth of field. I'll let in this scenario, shutter speed isn't important, so I'm not trying to do a long exposure. What I'm interested is in having everything sharp from front to back. So I'll be using aperture priority, for example, and let the camera decide. These images are all blended images, so they're bracketed simply because of the dynamic range. So if we got the right exposure for the foreground, the sky would have been completely blown out. So I bracket my images and I blend them together using Photoshop. Speaking of editing software, actually, it'll be good to see what you guys use to edit your photos. So I'm just going to open another poll up, and just to see whether you use a laptop, a desktop, or a cell phone. So I know some people do just like to do quick edits on their cell phone. So I'm just going to open that up now, and let me know what you prefer to use. Okay, wow. So that's quite unexpected, actually. So 52% use a laptop, 38% use a desktop, and 10% use a cell phone. And I say it's unexpected just because I do have a laptop and I do use it when I'm actually traveling. It just obviously makes life so much easier to be able to store and back up my images on the laptop, just to make sure I don't lose anything if I have a card failure or lose a camera, God forbid. But I am surprised that the majority still choose a laptop. So when I'm at home, I always use a desktop. That being said, obviously my desktop is a lot more powerful than my laptop is. So I just find it makes my workflow so much easier. But also the fact that you know, I can use a proper monitor which is calibrated. I know you can calibrate a laptop, but I've just found that with laptops, you know, the angle of the screen does make a difference, especially when you're trying to get the contrast and the exposure right. So at least I rest assured when I'm using a monitor that it's absolutely as I want it to look. And the benQ photographer monitors actually have a hood, which are really good at blocking out stray light, which unfortunately a laptop doesn't. Unless you're kind of sitting in the dark on a laptop, it's not quite the same. So really interesting there. Thank you guys for participating and answering the question there. So I'll just crack on with the Dolomites. Obviously, my passion for the Dolomites is definitely coming out. So yeah, like I said, this is Trichime, one of the most famous locations in the Dolomites, and this is Cinque Terre, or the Five Towers. From this angle, you can't really see five of them, but they're there, I promise. So this is an example of getting in really close with a wide-angle lens, 14 millimeter, literally about 3 inches away from these daisies, and this is a focus stacked image. So I've taken about 6 different images here to make sure everything is in focus. The reason is being so close to the flowers and relatively far from the mountain or the tower here, if I focus on this flower, I'd only just about get to the second flower in focus. So I've focus stacked here 6 images, focusing at a different plane. So for example, the first one would be on this flower exactly, second one would be here, third would be here, fourth, fifth, and then 6 on the mountain to make sure everything is absolutely tack sharp. So yeah, this happened. This was a sunrise on the last day of the trip. This was after the workshop I had in the Dolomites. It was just so after the workshop, Christine, my partner, came up to the Dolomites, and we spent another week just going to places I hadn't visited before to scout new locations for potential workshops. And this location is actually in my future workshops just because it's an incredible, just an amazing location. And we actually spent the night at the Refugio, which is about 100 meters to my left. So you don't have to, you're not sleeping very far from the incredible locations. And that's why I really love the Dolomites. You know, you can wake up and you're literally on location. There's obviously places to explore, but you can be so close to what you want to shoot. It just makes it so convenient. This was also captured on my workshop there last year. It was the first time I ever actually experienced a cloud inversion. So a cloud inversion is where pretty much the clouds are below you, and it's almost like a waterfall of cloud. This is a very long exposure. It's 8 minutes long, and it's after sunset. So you can see there are trails here from a car going along the valley roads, but a really special shot. I'd never seen this before. I'd always wanted to capture a cloud inversion, and this was captured at Lagazzoi, which is one of the highest points of the Dolomites. And again, this is actually captured from the patio of the Refugio. So I've set my tripod up there by the railing and just shooting out so you can see this amazing view. This is an example of scale. So you can see there's a hut here. This is actually a Refugio, which you can spend the night at, perched on a cliff and surrounded by just some incredible mountains. This is shot at 200 millimeter, and it's shot in the blue hour. Just because I wanted to wait for the lights on the Refugio to light up, because if there wasn't that light, you probably wouldn't be able to see the Refugio at all. So really, you can really shoot from well before sunrise to well after sunrise, and just the same, well before sunset to after sunset. This is me waiting for the Milky Way over Trichime. So it's the same mountains that I mentioned earlier, just from a different perspective. I set up my tent here purely as a prop. I wasn't actually sleeping in the tent. I was sleeping in the Refugio, which is down here. Again, as you can see, really close to the location, and just really one of my favorite shots here. I managed to still get the warm colors on the horizon of sunset, but the stars started to set in before the Milky Way made its appearance. The Milky Way is actually just here, but it's not quite visible yet at that time. Probably my favorite shot from the trip, the money shot. This is Monte Paterno, which is a very famous mountain just next to Trichime, but I found these interesting leading lines in the ground and could use them. They really help to guide the eye towards the main subject, which is the mountain. Again, this is sunrise. You can see the glow coming in from the left. It's a bracketed shot again, and it's a focus stacked shot. So I've focus stacked about 3 shots for the foreground because my camera was probably about 10 centimeters away from the rocks here. And then I've bracketed the sky. So there's no need to bracket the foreground. As long as you want a good exposure to work with for the foreground, you just need to bracket the sky to make sure you capture all the information in the sky. This is, again, Trichime. This was the actual sunset. There was quite a bit of cloud before it dissipated. So just like the previous shot here, where I was waiting for the Milky Way, this is just before that. The sunset, the last light hitting the peaks, creating a beautiful glow and really nice separation on the warm side of the image with the cooler side of the image. This is Seceda, very almost Lord of the Rings style ridge with these incredible imposing peaks. You can see the angle of the pastures here, which are just incredible. In winter, this is actually a ski resort, so you can actually ski down these slopes, and there are a couple of little refugios and houses dotted around. But this is an incredible location. Every time I've been to this location, it's always been raining, so I've not had much luck. Actually, both times we were caught in a thunderstorm, so not just rain, but thunder. And it was about an hour's hike to the refugio we were staying at, so luckily it was downhill, of course. But yeah, definitely took we were freezing and we were cold, freezing and wet by the time we got back, but got some interesting shots just before sunset here. This is a place I explored last year with Christine. It's not that well. You might recognize it from the introduction to the film Cliffhanger. It's where Sylvester Stallone was hanging off the ladder in the beginning, I believe, or they were crossing from one peak to another, which isn't something climbers would usually do unless they were slacklining. But yeah, we spent the night at this refugio, again, 100 meters up the road, and you can get an amazing shot. This was sunset. I was hoping for the Milky Way, but unfortunately this cloud just continued to roll in and completely covered the sky, so that never happened. This is the back of Trichime with clouds and fog beginning to form. A lot of the times you don't want to have clouds that are kind of obscuring the shot, but in this case I think they just make it seem more ghostly and dreamy, so really, really happy with the shot. This is one of those little random chapels that you find all over the Dolomites. Beautiful. You can't really find a better location, can you, than with the backdrop of these mountains. These are the Cardini di Misurina. Again, this is a bracketed shot, two exposures, one for the mountains in foreground and one for the sky. This is probably my favorite, or well, it's hard to say it's my favorite actually. There are so many awesome locations in the Dolomites, but this is Alpi di Suisi, sorry, the highest alpine pasture in Europe, usually covered with fog. There was a bit of haze, but not so much fog. But again, just beautiful. These little huts dotted around, random trees, and then Sassolungo, one of those famous mountains in the Dolomites in the background. And again, this is just an example of, you don't have to always have those warm colors and fiery sunrises. You can still make do with cool and moody skies. Again, the architect, whoever designed and decided to build this chapel here, certainly knew what he was doing, because it's hard to find a better view for a backdrop for this church. This was sunrise on the last day of my first time in the Dolomites. We visited this location and drove through the rain and the clouds to get up here. But when we did, we were rewarded with just an incredible sunrise, fiery sky. This little lake, it's more of a pond than a lake, is perfect to get a nice reflection of the mountains. But absolutely incredible place. When the weather isn't great, you can still get some incredible shots. You get this dramatic light. So, these mountains are all in the shade, and then you've got a splash of light the sun breaking through the clouds and just lighting up the mountains. So don't put your camera away just because it doesn't look like it might be a colorful sunset, because you can still get some incredible images. Again, this is same thing, light breaking through the clouds and hitting one particular part of the scene, but the rest, especially this peak here, is just shrouded with cloud and that cold light. Again, pretty similar. I like to call this like storm light, the very dramatic light you get when there's clouds and storms very close to the ground. Well, we're on to Iceland already, aren't we? So yeah, just before we start talking about Iceland, just wanted to ask another question, which is around those of you who do use a desktop or even a laptop, I suppose, but I don't think laptops come any bigger than 19-inch, just to see, kind of get an idea of what size monitor people use. So I'm just going to send another poll out there. If you guys would like to respond, there are several options. like different size categories, and there's also an option for I don't own a monitor if you don't own a monitor. So I'm going to launch that now. Let me know what size monitor you use. Okay, so closing the vote now. So the majority use a 27-inch monitor. So that's actually what I'm using now. The SW270C, the benQ SW270C is a 27-inch monitor. I think that's probably what I found to be the ideal size. I really like the fact that this monitor is not 4K. So I don't own a 4K monitor, but I have played around with using editing on a 4K monitor before. And what I've found is that with 4K, everything seems so sharp just because of the high resolution that you actually it might not actually be that sharp. And when you see it on any other monitor, it might then look a bit soft. So I think the 270 is perfect purely because it's effectively a 2K monitor. It's more than HD. I think we're way past HD now, but still gives you the right balance between knowing if something is properly sharp or not. So thanks again for answering that question. So onto Iceland, and talking about mentioning accurate colors earlier. Ice caves, apart from being absolutely incredible, getting the colors right in an ice cave can be a challenge, because they do vary, obviously, but there's a very fine line between it being spot on and the really accurate color, and it being a bit too blue or a bit too green. So this is an ice cave which I shot in 2018 on the Breda Mercuriocul Glacier. This was a trip I went my first time in Iceland in winter. I went with a friend of mine, and we hired a private guide for an ice cave tour simply because we wanted to make sure we got the shots. So private guides in Iceland are not cheap, but if you want to get a good shot, that is pretty much what you have to do. So there's two types of ice cave tours. They're the ice caves which are very accessible, where they will literally drive busloads of tourists to within 50 meters of the cave, and everyone gets out, and you'll be in this cave with another 50 or 100 people. Or there are private tours where you'd visit more remote caves like this. So this cave required a 4-kilometer trek across a glacier, and because it requires that 4-kilometer trek in full gear, so helmet, harness, crampons, and being roped up to the guide, not everyone's going to do that. One, because they wouldn't be up for walking across the glacier for about an hour and a half, and two, because it's a lot more pricey. So you pay that bit extra, but then you're rewarded with having a place like this effectively to yourself. If there were 50 other people in this image, it certainly wouldn't work as well. This is a selfie. This is me posing there in the cave. It is bracketed heavily, so it's actually 9 shots, 2 stops apart. The reason is that most of the cave is almost pitch black, and then you've got an opening here in the ceiling where a lot of light is coming through, and that's super bright. So taking multiple exposures to be able to capture all the information is vital in an ice cave. And this is a little stream running in the ice cave. So there's water running in the ground here, and it's giving this beautiful reflection of the ceiling. So just 2 seconds, there we go. So my first trip to Iceland was actually me attending a workshop. And like I said, it's definitely something I'd recommend. If you attend a workshop, you can really focus on learning and improving your own skills. Whereas if you go there on your own, not only do you have to worry about the planning and getting to the locations and potentially not knowing where the locations are, but you also have to contend with maybe not being there at the right time. So when you're in a workshop, that's all taken care of for you. You're paying a workshop organizer or a guide to be able to take care of you and do that for you. So we got this location. This is the midnight sun. So this is actually about 1 a.m. The fascinating thing about Iceland in summer is that the sun only sets below the horizon at about midnight and rises at about 1 a.m. So what that means is if you're lucky, you can get a fiery sky for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours at a time. Whereas here in Malta, if you get a fiery sky, it might last 5 or 10 minutes. In Iceland, you can literally go to 2 or 3, if you're lucky enough, 2 or 3 different locations and be shooting the same fiery sky. So all the photographers clearly choose to use this perch here. I wanted to include them in the scale, in the image, just to give a sense of scale of how big the waterfall actually is. So I climbed a bit further up, and by climbing further up and being kind of halfway up the waterfall, I was also able to reduce the distortion. So if you shoot from down here, as you can see, the camera is pointing up towards the waterfall, which adds a lot of distortion and makes the waterfall kind of bend unnaturally. Whereas being in the halfway up here at this level, I was able to kind of reduce the distortion on that. This is that same place in winter. So you can see it looks very different. No snow, but frost. So as you can see, the spray from the waterfall just instantly freezes on contact with the ground, creates some really interesting additional interest, which is never here in summer. These stalactites in the hanging off the overhanging roof here. You can actually walk all the way around this this waterfall. You can walk back here. It's a passage. Not in winter though, because it's all icy and slippery. You can't really walk around. The passages are blocked off, but definitely a really interesting place. This is a sunset. No cloud, well, very light cloud cover, which caught some of the light, but again, completely different in winter to what it is in summer. This is a long exposure. I believe it's 30 seconds long. Generally, when I shoot waterfalls, I try to keep my exposures much shorter because there's such a volume of water that you don't need a 30-second exposure to be able to get smooth water. But in this case, I think it was. I just wanted to make it feel a bit more dreamy and a bit smoother compared to a shorter exposure. So again, I like to keep people in my images for scale. This is the famous black sand beach in Vic. This is the mouth of a cave, which I had tried shooting earlier, but wasn't quite working for me. Very, very rainy afternoon, as you can see. But again, you can have some incredible drama from a moody sky. You don't always have to have color. Luckily, this person happened to be wearing a red jacket, so they really stood out. To be fair, I think jackets nowadays are all pretty much yellow or red, so they help you in that sense when you've got a moody picture. But I just wanted to give a sense of scale of how big these cliffs are and this person on the beach. This is shot at a wide angle lens as well, so it helps to kind of give that perspective. This is Skogafoss waterfall. Again, moody sky. It's actually in the middle of the day, so you can see there's some very light hints of blue in the background there. But with enough cloud cover, you get beautiful soft light, which works in this case. There's a very famous troll face here. So if you see this rock, you can see as though it's the profile of a face looking towards the waterfall. This area is now cordoned off, so you can't really go up there anymore. But before it was cordoned off, my first film I managed to capture this, which I was really happy with. Very dreamy, almost feels like an alien world, to be honest. This is Jökulsárlón, the glacier lagoon. So the ice cave I visited is somewhere along the glacier here. Massive chunks of ice, icebergs, break off from the glacier as it's moving towards the lagoon, and they float around until they're basically small enough to exit the lagoon. Now there's two types of ice. There's the clear ice, and I mean like crystal clear ice, and then there's the ice which is more bluish and has air bubbles in it, but really, really interesting. You get these bits of ice just like beaching themselves here in the water. And again, I've gone for a reflection kind of shot to get the reflection of the sky in there. This is another ice cave shot. So again, the advantage of having a private tour is your guide is willing to climb up and pose for you. So this is the entrance to the ice cave, and then there's a little window there, obviously all completely natural. But our guide obliged us by going up there and posing the window. Again, it gives a sense of scale to show just how big these caves are. I love the fact that there was wet patches in the ground here, and I could get the reflection just to kind of strengthen the composition. In terms of composition as well, you've got a nice line leading in from the left, just guiding the eye towards the brightest part of the image, which is where the subject is. As you can see, the walls of the cave are literally solid ice. Really, really fascinating, and I'd recommend anyone who gets the opportunity to visit an ice cave. Speaking of an ice cave, just another one. This is the same ice cave. So that shot I shot earlier was just around here, shooting the entrance and that window. This is further in the cave. As you can see, it's just unreal. A selfie as well for scale with the ice axe in my hand. Frozen ground here with water running underneath it. So it can be at times a bit dodgy or hairy, to say the least, because everywhere you walk, well, sometimes the ice is thin enough. As you can see, these cracks here, you kind of sink into the water. Luckily, it's not deep, but yeah, definitely an experience that I'd recommend everyone interested in photography attempts. These are very, very frozen stairs in Iceland. Again, I've used the banisters here, the railings, as a leading line to take you towards the subject. As you can see, everything's just completely frozen, and this is the mist that comes off the waterfall, which freezes on contact. This is on the Snæfellsnes Peninsula of Iceland in the west. There was a massive blizzard that morning when we got here in the afternoon. I managed to get this beautiful light dusting of snow. As you can see, the rocks are all black because it's lava rock, but the snow really helps to kind of bring out the detail and the interest there. So this is that image I showed earlier when I was talking about not always having the best equipment. So this is with a crop sensor body and a very cheap wide angle, but being able to focus stack and post-processing the image helps you bring out all the detail. And we were blessed with an incredible warm sunset, colorful sunset there. This is Stokksnes, very famous mountain in Iceland. I've been to this place every time I've been to Iceland, and it's always different. So in the winter here, the sand's literally frozen, and you get these small build-up of snow stuck to the frozen sand, which make for an interesting photo. Especially when they catch the light, it really helps to make it look 3D and add depth. So same place, different time of year. This was last September. I was there running a workshop with 2 clients, and when they returned, I then spent an additional week on my own just going to explore new places. This isn't really a new place because I've been there each of the 4 times before, but I wanted to go there again just to try my luck and see if I can get a better shot. This is a reflection as the tide recedes. So it's literally just timing this between one wave and the other. It's a really cool place and definitely a must visit in Iceland. This is a famous hidden waterfall. It's in a canyon. I like to call it the washing machine. It's absolutely soaking wet in there. So you need to be really prepared when you shoot an image like this. As soon as you go in there and take your camera out, the lens will almost instantly be covered in spray droplets because of the waterfall. So you need to be, it's not easy to get an image here. You need to kind of be on the tripod. You need to have your settings dialed in before, ideally, and literally shoot and wipe your lens to take off any droplets, and then shoot again. And it's almost just like praying that you get a clean exposure without water droplets. In fact, this isn't even a perfect exposure because there are some water droplets up here, which I just couldn't control, but really, really interesting location. This is Háifoss, which is, as soon as you start to get towards the highlands of Iceland, in the center of Iceland, things start to get even more crazy, but really, really interesting. So beautiful waterfall here. We arrived and it was pouring, but within about 20 minutes, as you can see here, the rain moved further down the valley. So I got out and managed to shoot this image. This is a 10-second exposure. The water is moving so fast here that it really blurs out quickly. So you don't need to go for like a 30-second or a 1-minute exposure in this case. And again, just shot at 16mm or shot on a tripod. I always shoot on a tripod. I don't really shoot handheld unless there's a specific reason. So this is the same place in a different season. So this is Broarfoss, and this is in a very broody, dark September. And this is actually colorful and light in March, in winter. So you can see obviously snow all over the place, bits of ice here, which are just frozen to the rocks in the foreground, but really, really interesting overall as a location. Now it requires like a 45-minute walk now to get there because they've closed off some of the access. It's on private land, and unfortunately people were being irresponsible and not sticking to the actual pathways, so the landowners decided to close that off. And that's something else I wanted to mention. You know, when you're out shooting, always respect. First of all, respect nature, because you know ultimately all of these things are nature giving us these beautiful scenes. Whether it's the colors in the sky, the colors in the trees, the fact that there's water in this river, but also be respectful. Don't leave any wrappers or papers or rubbish behind you. If you carried it in, you can carry it back out. It's that simple. It's even easier because it's lighter when you're carrying an empty wrapper out. But just don't litter, because the last thing you want to do is go to a place like this and find litter and plastic bottles and stuff. So again, same location, different season, a very different image. So this is almost the exact location. The only difference is for this shot, I'm standing in front of this rock. This rock was just foreground. So as you can see, I like to use foreground. This is again focus stacked. I believe it's 6 images, just because I wanted to make sure I got everything in focus and because my lens was stuck at f2.8. But yeah, completely different feel to the image in the different seasons. This is last September, the very famous Trichime fig, but a beautiful sunset. Again, you can see very wet pavement here. It was just after a rain shower, but it gave us a glorious, glorious sunset. This is Aldearfoss in the north of Iceland. So I've only been to the north of Iceland once in 2017, and it was when I went there with Christine. We did the whole ring road and traveled all the way around Iceland. Got color for a few seconds, but that was it. So I was luckily in the right place. I managed to include foreground here and some interest in the rocks and the moss. But yeah, I was really pleased with the shot overall. These are the geothermal mud pots. So you can see steam coming out of the ground. There are loads of these all over Iceland, and then you find these beautiful mud pots where this mud is actually boiling hot. You actually see bubbles coming up. And beautiful formations of the mud here that's dried and cracked along the floor. This is that same waterfall, Seljalandsfoss, I showed you at the beginning. This is now behind the waterfall, so you've got a beautiful veil of water coming down, catching the warm light, and obviously the sun setting there. You can see the car park there, pretty full, but yeah, beautiful location to shoot and perfect for sunset in the summer. This is Jökulsárlón again. And when I say the ice is crystal clear, you can actually see it's like a diamond. That's a rock, and that's obviously just a block of ice there. And you can see the glacier in the background there, reflecting the colors at sunset. This is the diamond beach right next to Jökulsárlón. So the pieces of ice that crack off from the glacier and make their way out of the lagoon, then get washed up on the beach with the swell and the waves. And you can get some absolutely surreal images of just the waves and the wash of water going past and dragging the ice along the beach. Really, really awesome place. This is Hauifoss again, but in autumn. So this is the first time I actually got to see autumn colors. We don't really have autumn colors in Malta because it never gets cold enough, but definitely here the colors are really popping. Beautiful oranges and reds throughout the landscape. This is Öxarárfoss. It's in the Golden Circle, another beautiful waterfall. This is, I think, a 3-second exposure, but managed to get some nice color. This was my last day in Iceland last September. This is the Valley of Tears. Believe it or not, it's man-made. It's actually it's like an emergency canal which was dug for water from the power plant. There's a hydroelectric power plant just up here, and if they need to divert the water from the river, they pass it through this canal. So it was dredged. It's man-made, but it's absolutely beautiful with the water streaming down anyway, and the color of the water coming from the glacier. This was a beautiful spot. I only visited this once last September. I only discovered it last year. Beautiful hike. It took about an hour to get here. And there was a lot of controversy around this spot because people call it like a secret spot. but you know, if you look hard enough, you'll find it. But absolutely incredible. The perfect symmetry of the canyon walls, the triangular mountain at the end, the waterfall, and the river down through the valley is just absolutely stunning. And I think it probably works better with this moody sky than it would on a sunny day, to be honest. Again, this is Takgil in Iceland, a beautiful place again, very misty and foggy, but just adds to the mystery of the image. And this is a 4-second exposure on the water. The sky is also bracketed just because there were some really bright patches there through the fog. Dynjandi, one of the probably the most beautiful waterfall I've ever been to in Iceland. It's just incredible. Dynjandi means thunderous in Icelandic, and when you walk up to the top, this is the main waterfall, it actually sounds like thunder. You can't speak to the person next to you, it's that loud, but really, really beautiful place to visit. Skogafoss. So earlier I showed you the image of further up here where there was the troll's face. This is down at the bottom. This is a long exposure here, 30 seconds, and there was one tourist there. They were more interested in looking at their phone than they were at the waterfall, but at least they were staying still, so that meant I could capture them without too much movement. This is a waterfall I came across by accident, really. It's a beautiful location right in the middle of a valley, and this is shot at like 1 in the afternoon, so it's not sunrise or sunset, but again, thick cloud cover meant it was possible to shoot this. And just one thing actually, so I'm going to move on to the Milky Way. I'm just going to open up a poll to see how many of you have actually captured the Milky Way before. So if you've ever taken photos of the Milky Way. So I'm just going to open that poll up now, if you can respond with a yes or a no. Okay, perfect. So 2/3 have said no, and 1/3 have said yes. So being in Malta, the advantage of living in Malta is that 2 hours south, there's no pretty much land until you reach the Libyan coast in Africa. So there's a couple of hundreds of kilometers without any civilization, which also means no light pollution. So it actually means facing south, we're in a good position to be able to capture the Milky Way. We do have the trouble of our own light pollution, and Malta has a lot of light pollution, but generally, because if you can shoot from the south coast, you can still get some pretty good images. This is the Milky Way in the Dolomites. So the workshop I did, or actually all of the workshops I've done for the Dolomites, have always specifically been with astro in mind. So we go when there's a new moon, so we can actually not just shoot landscapes, but also shoot the Milky Way at night. So this glow here on the horizon is just light pollution from the towns below, but you can see the core of the Milky Way up there, and the clouds shrouding everything but the top of the mountains, which was just a dream. So, 1 second, there we go. So this is Mary's Cave, or Arta Maria, which is what I mentioned earlier, the shot I showed you from sunset. This is what I was waiting for, the Milky Way arching over the cave. I've been to this place 4 or 5 times. This is probably the best conditions I've had for it, the clearest sky with the most detail in the Milky Way, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to be going again. I just keep going back to try and get better or more interesting compositions potentially. So this is that boulder I mentioned earlier when we talked about the rainbow. As you can see, this is me still on top of it, and it's probably 4 or 5 times taller than I am. So I'd probably say it's 9 to 10 or 8 to 10 meters tall. But again, perfectly aligned with the Milky Way. I've used photo pills to make sure I go when the Milky Way is aligned to the boulder, which will be at the right time, basically. That's where planning is really important. This is the Milky Way over Jebel Chantar in the south of Malta and the little island of Filfla there. I just put my tent there as an interesting subject, just to kind of throw that warm light on the rocks and just give an idea of a night scene. This is a chapel in Dingley, the west of Malta. And again, the Milky Way core. This is shot in May. Earlier in the year, the Milky Way is more, it's kind of tilted. It becomes more upright later in the season, towards the end of summer. Again, this is Blazin Mel, the Milky Way, and the massive boulders, and then just a selfie there using the light. I wanted to use the light to try and throw warm light on the boulder to help the texture really stand out, and also just to add some interest to the image. This was the first image I captured this year since we were under partial lockdown. So Malta was never under a full-on lockdown, but we were discouraged from traveling. So what I did was I went to this cave on my own at about 3 in the morning. This is in winter, to shoot this image. I wasn't in contact with anyone else, so I thought at least it's safe, but at least I can get out and still be creative. This is again at Blazin Mel, just a different boulder in the foreground, the Milky Way up in the sky, and then climbed up this cliff here to pose as a selfie, and just to give a sense of scale of how big the cliff actually is. The Milky Way over Trichime and the Dolomites. So again, as you can see, there's a lot that you can shoot around the Trichime. And this is shot this recently, actually, just about a month ago in a workshop I did, an astro workshop in the west of Malta. So this is a girna, which is a stone hut. I lit up from the inside just to kind of show. So the ceiling's collapsed now. It was back in the day it would have had a roof on it, but I've lit it up as just kind of like a foreground subject, and waited for the Milky Way to be perfectly upright above it. This is a shot I've been waiting for a long time. I call this the shark fin rock. From the side profile, it looks exactly like a shark's fin. Again, I've just gone in there to give a sense of scale of how big the rock is. The core of the Milky Way is partially hidden. Unfortunately, there's no time of year from where the camera is set that you can get the full Milky Way. You'd have to move the camera to the right and step out of this gorge to be able to capture it. But I quite like this because it still gives an indication of the Milky Way. And this is just another random shot, very rough area in Maestral Nature Park, which is one of the protected areas in Malta. Massive boulders everywhere, really tough shrubs to get around, but managed to capture the Milky Way. This is with a 14mm lens, and these are with a 24mm lens. So as you see, the majority of the images I've shot at 24mm just because I have a 24mm f1.4 lens, which is fantastic for landscapes. I also track with that lens, so I track the sky to get the maximum amount of detail rather than shooting at 24mm on full frame. You're generally limited to about 13 seconds, but using a tracker, I generally shoot a 4-minute exposure for the sky and then a separate 4-minute exposure for the foreground. And then in this case, the third image would be me in there. I haven't stayed still for 4 minutes. That's just like a 2-second exposure with different settings. Something that I like to focus on as well is starscape. So the Milky Way gets all the attention when it comes to the night sky, but you can have a beautiful image with just stars in the sky or a specific constellation. So this is, for example, in Tuscany, the same cypress trees, but capturing the beauty of the night sky behind it. This is also in Maestral Park. Again, wasn't ideal. The Milky Way is here. I was waiting for the Milky Way to come into frame, but we started to get clouds and it wasn't great. So I just shot a different image altogether with just the stars in the sky. This is that image from Mount Etna with the constellation Orion up here in the right. And this is a really cool cave I discovered this year. Again, I'm posing in there just to show how big the cave is. This is in the south of Malta. And again, just waiting for the stars to start shining through. This is also in Tuscany. I love the simple composition here. 2 cypress trees. There's the glow of the light pollution, which pretty much illuminated a bit of the landscape, and then the beautiful sky with the constellations in there. This was one of the last images I captured this summer. A friend of mine and I had been planning to shoot this massive boulder, which is in Ammih in the northwest of Malta. I wanted the tent there just to give a sense of story to the image, like an adventure night sleeping out. And he brought a friend along who's actually a very talented rock climber to pose on top of the boulder to just show how massive this boulder actually is. So I shot a separate image of this border with the Milky Way, but I actually prefer this simple starscape instead of having the Milky Way. This is in Wales, beautiful place. That mountain is called Trichime, and it's just right next to Snowdonia, but again, just waiting for the right time to be able to shoot the stars in the sky. This is a tower on the island of Comino, which is another island close to Malta, and really a really interesting place to shoot, just because it's less accessible. So there's no roads to the island. The only way to get there is by ferry. There's not really any facilities apart from a hotel, which is currently being refurbished. So you pretty much have to camp if you go to the island and spend the night. This is again Cinque Terre, the 5 towers that I showed you earlier with the daisies. This is at night though. Again, really clear skies up in the mountains. This is Trichime. This is before sunrise. You can start to see alpenglow hitting the top of the mountains, but really beautiful transition between the high clouds starting to capture the warm light of sunrise, but the stars are still shining bright in the sky. And this is that similar to that. It's the same location as that sunrise shot I mentioned earlier. This is just before that. The stars were still visible in the sky. There was a beautiful glow because of the thin clouds, but altogether just made for a fantastic image. Something else we can do with stars is star trails. So if we combine multiple exposures, it looks as if the stars are running through the image. What's actually happening is the Earth's rotation. The stars stay in the same place, but the Earth's rotating on its axis, and it gives the impression that the sky is moving. So it can be really creative. This is the famous Azure window in Gozo, which collapsed 3 years ago. Unfortunately, it was a massive tourist attraction, but it was pretty much, it collapsed in a massive storm, and it's completely gone. Not even a stack is left. It's just completely clean cut off from the cliff. We were actually planning to go and shoot this a couple of weeks. We had planned to go and shoot it, and then it collapsed a couple of weeks before we had planned to shoot it. So just missed another opportunity. I wanted to get a better image of it, but hey ho, it made this image more meaningful, I suppose. This is just a random ruins we found of a building, but again, just using the star trail method. In this case, we're using the comet method, where rather than the stars being the same width throughout, they taper. So they start off being the full width and they narrow down. This is all done through software. So there's specific softwares for star trails. Most of them are free. Just type star trail onto Google and you'll be able to find loads about it. Again, another star trail here. If you get the North Star Polaris in the image, you'll get these concentric circles. If you're shooting more away from the north, you'll get longer lines and trails. So this is shooting towards the east, for example. Again, this is the Comino Tower. I got a composition where I perfectly lined up with the railings to act as leading lines and pull the eye into the shot. And this is again in Duera and Gozo. Another arch which is still there in Gozo is this arch here. Again, this is a 4-hour-long star trail, just leaving the camera going, changing the battery halfway through, but managing to get the result I was pleased with. Now, Aurora. So this is probably something that a lot of people probably on their bucket list as well. So I've been lucky enough to see the Aurora several times. I'm just going to run through some of the images I've captured of the Aurora. So, 1 second, there we go. So this is the Aurora over Skogafoss in Iceland, that famous waterfall. The intensity of the Aurora does vary a lot, and obviously you need clear skies for it. So it's not very easy to be able to capture really good images of it, but you try to, it's all about sacrifice and being motivated to make the effort. So, you don't capture these sort of images by getting to bed at 10 p.m. and sleeping through till the morning. You need to be kind of making the effort, making the sacrifice. You feel uncomfortable, you feel tired, but it's all worth it in the end once you actually manage to get those shots or you see the Aurora with your eyes. I mean, this occasion in particular, we were shooting from about 10 p.m. all the way to about 4 in the morning. And the only reason I stopped was because I knew I had a 6-hour drive the next day. And I was pretty happy with what I captured in those 6 hours. If I didn't have a 6-hour drive the next day, I would have kept shooting until the sun came up. But you know, I've captured enough material in those 6 hours to be happy with. But this was an incredible night. It was KP6, which is quite rare, really powerful Northern Lights. You need to use shorter shutter speeds for stuff like this. So when it's this active, the Northern Lights move so quickly that you're literally just shooting a 1 or 2 second exposure. I then shot a long exposure for the foreground. This is like a 4-minute exposure just to be able to get detail out of it and minimize the noise. But you need to be using a short shutter speed. This as well, literally 2-minute shutter speed, sorry, 2-second shutter speed for the sky, and then like a 4-minute exposure for the foreground, and blend them together in post-processing. So really important thing to remember is just because you've got something amazing like a fantastic sunset or the aurora, you still need to think about composition. So, you know, just a shot of the bit of green in the sky on itself isn't going to make a compelling image. So here I've used the suspension bridge at Yokel Salon as a leading line to kind of pull the eye into the image. And again here, same thing, I've used the road to kind of lead your eye into the image. And the aurora was pretty much directly overhead. This is with a wide angle 14mm lens, so it's a very wide field of view. This is the first time I ever saw purple aurora, and this is near the Black Sand Beach in Iceland. This was in winter, as you can see from the snow on the mountains. But again, an 8-minute exposure for the foreground, and this was a 30-second exposure for the sky. You can start to see the trails in the stars there. The aurora wasn't very active there. Again, really fast-moving aurora here, shorter shutter speed. Cool. So last thing I wanted to go through here is around severe weather. So I just wanted to put out the last poll, I promised. And it's if ever you have ever taken pictures of like lightning or severe weather. So I'm going to launch that now, and just let me know whether it's a yes or no. Severe weather is particularly intriguing as part, well, since you're talking about nature itself. Okay. So most of you guys have voted. I'll just give it another 5 seconds and then close it. Perfect. So 58% have said no and 42 have said yes. So the first thing I'll say is when I mention severe weather, this is not like the kind of severe weather that you'd see in the US, unfortunately. In our little island, we do get what are called summer thunderstorms, really, just because of the amount of heat that's captured in the land during the day and the warm sea, because it's we're an island in the Mediterranean. But we still can get some really interesting. So this is affectionately known as a rain bomb. It's a massive, thick rain shaft here. What you'd consider torrential rain for anything that's caught under that. You know, the areas caught in there would experience like severe flooding. But it did move pretty quickly in this case. So quite an interesting image. First I ever captured anything like that. So I talked earlier about the importance of, you know, just because there's a dark sky or there's no color doesn't mean you shouldn't be shooting. So this is an example, a thunderstorm rolling in here, really dark skies, but it gives so much interest to the image. Same here, you can start to see the low cloud rolling in here throughout this in the middle of a thunderstorm. You can also get some really cool dappled light when you've got these thick clouds and the sun manages to break through them. And you can also get really interesting cloud formations like this Mammatus cloud. So this was just before sunset and warm light coming through the patch where there's no clouds, but beautiful detail in the clouds there. And then this is a shot at sunrise, so using a trigger, Myops trigger, to be able to capture lightning at sunrise. So when you're shooting at night, generally I don't use a trigger, we just shoot effectively a time lapse, one shot after the other, 30-second exposures, and just adjust the ISO and the aperture based on how close or far the thunderstorm is. Obviously, if it's far away, you want to let in more light, so you'd increase the ISO and open up the aperture. Whereas if it's really close, you'd close the aperture and reduce the ISO because you don't want to risk blowing out the highlights. But this was captured with a trigger. The first shot I captured with the trigger. And the advantage of a trigger is you're able to capture lighting pretty much. You're not going to do it in broad daylight, obviously, because there's too much light. There is not enough contrast. But this at sunrise was enough contrast to be able to capture the lightning strike here. So this has a very good story. This is probably my favorite image of severe weather. This was captured in Gozo. Christine and I were there for our anniversary weekend. We went there for a little weekend break, getaway. I knew there was a storm coming, but we had our anniversary dinner booked. So obviously I thought if I cancel my anniversary dinner to shoot lightning, Christine probably won't be too pleased. So I had the idea of leaving my camera on its own in the balcony of the hotel, just shooting one frame after the other, and it would just keep shooting until either the battery died or the memory card was full. We went out to dinner, had a fantastic dinner, and then came back and found this one image. So, you know, I knew the storm would be moving north to south, and that there was a chance that there would be, you know, decent lightning, but nothing this spectacular. So I set, for best case scenario, I closed the aperture completely down to f16 to really kind of, a shot like this, if you're at, for example, f4, you just have a white image. There's so much light here, and it's actually, you know, probably 1.5 kilometers away at the maximum. So such a big bolt of lightning would completely blow out the highlights. So I gambled on f16 and ISO 100, and it turned out to be worth it for sure. So really happy with that. This is another one of my favorite images, 3 massive bolts from the same strike. You can see one's clearly hitting land, one's clearly hitting the sea, and still unsure on this one, the biggest one, whether that's actually on land or sea, but really, really interesting. Obviously, there are significant risks with severe weather, whether it's being stuck in a flood, whether it's obviously being struck by lightning. Let's hope that never happens to any one of us or anyone else. But obviously also there's just other risks involved. You know, you are driving on wet, slippery roads, so it's just important to be careful. This is Indina, the old capital city of Malta, with a fortified city, and there's a lightning strike behind that in the sky. Another massive one. Still unsure whether this bolt has actually hit the ship or not, but beautiful streakers all across the sky there. One of the most interesting structures I've seen. So thunderstorms suck up humidity and warm air, and as you can see here on the left, there's almost like a corkscrew effect as the humidity is pulled into so this is the inflow, is being pulled into the storm. Obviously beautiful cloud formations, really super smooth clouds here, and the higher clouds up there potentially being to form Marmatus, but beautiful image overall. This did not hit the ship, it's directly behind it, but it does look like it almost did. Another really interesting shot. These are all 30 seconds, and like I said, I just vary the shutter speed and ISO depending on how close or far the storm is. I call this one the jellyfish just because it had a really interesting shape compared to other thunderstorms I've seen. I love the warm colors. There was a southerly wind and a lot of sand in the end. That's what creates these warmer colors in the thunderstorm. Generally, they're more blue or purple, but these oranges are here because of the sand which was in the air at the time. A picture with the full thunderstorm. So this is called the anvil, or the top of the storm cell. And obviously a lightning strike coming out here and just about missing the cliffs there of Goldzo. Again, the anvil on the top. This is the full structure, and you can see the different lightning bolts coming out. This is the last big storm we had, which was about 3 weeks ago. It actually hit land here. There's a massive boulder, and this is Maestral Park, which I mentioned earlier. And if you zoom in 100%, you can actually see that it's hit a massive boulder there. Really, really close, probably too close for comfort. This was like 3 or 4 kilometers away from where we were, and we were exposed, so it's not an ideal place to be. But luckily, it was everything went well. But again, just, you know, when you have these sort of images and you're dealing with contrast, really important to have a monitor that is capable of displaying that contrast, that gives you the right gamut, but also one which has the right colors. So calibrating it is extremely important. And I try to calibrate it every 2 months just to make sure that the colors remain true, the contrast remains true as well, and we avoid having inaccurate colors, because the last thing I want to do is go to print this for a client and then look at the print and it looks nothing like what I envisioned it to be when I processed it. This is a crawler, so it's cloud to cloud lightning up in the sky. It doesn't actually reach the ground, but really, really beautiful. You can see all the detail in the branches of the strike. And this here, so I've specifically zoomed in because of these clouds. These are pileus clouds, which happen when the top of the storm is growing so rapidly, it creates its own condensation in the form of a hat. Really, really, really beautiful to see and not too common. So I really wanted to capture that in the image. Obviously, there's also the lightning strike coming out there and the core of the cloud just being lit up beautifully. This is really recent. So this is shot from my balcony at home. Ever since I moved in, I always wanted to capture an image of a lightning strike on the top of this church. Obviously, I don't want any damage, but it would just make a fantastic image. So this is the closest I got a couple of weeks back. The same bolt came down to the left and to the right, but not on the church, but really, really interesting still. I just want to make sure I continue to keep trying to get up to that one image. This is a couple of weeks back as well. Really, really interesting. That's the island of Filfla, which we saw in the Milky Way image earlier. Again, just showing the kind of the different layers in the storm, the top of the storm, the high clouds. Absolutely stunning. This is a couple of weeks back as well. So we've had a good couple of weeks towards the end of summer. It's pretty much dried out now, so hopefully we'll get some more. This is something I've been wanting to capture for years, which is a very distant thunderstorm and the core of the Milky Way. And I managed to capture this year in September. And also, just trying to, because lightning isn't enough, trying to include kind of landscape lightning. And there's also Orion here in the sky. This was a very early morning storm. I noticed Orion was there, so I put on my widest lens to try and capture, a bit of a leading line with this road in the landscape, the thunderstorm itself, and Orion as well. So yeah, pretty pleased with that image. Something different, not just focusing on the storm, but also the greater picture. So that's the last of the images. Thank you for attending this. Now, because you've attended this, if you scan this QR code, you'll be asked for your email address, your name, and your first and last name. And I'll be sending out 3 guides: one on composition, one on capturing the Milky Way, one on capturing the Northern Lights, and one, I forgot what the last one is. But anyway, there are 4 free guides which will be sent to you as a PDF. So just scan this QR code. It will take you to a website, fill in the details. It's just your email address, name, first name and last, email address, first name and last name. And that will also subscribe you to my newsletter. Obviously, you'll be kept up to date with any tutorials I release, any updates about workshops, etc. But just wanted to give that to you as a thank you for attending this webinar. There's a couple more things I just want to mention. It was on before the presentation, there was my review of the benQ SW270C, the monitor I'm using. It's not a paid review, but I genuinely recommend having a read through it, because if you're looking for a monitor which is designed for you as a photographer, then I think you should look no further. It's a fantastic piece of equipment. It's all I use now. It's led to me using my laptop even less, to be honest, just because compared to this screen, the laptop looks like a Nokia 3310 from the 1990s. So really, really encourage you to have a read through that. And if you're in the market for a true monitor which is going to help your workflow, then I'd recommend looking at their product range. There are different sizes and different prices as well, obviously, so you can see whatever is suitable for your budget. If you want to learn more about landscape photography as well, I have an ebook which is called the Landscape Photography Handbook. It's €19.95, and this is just a brief explanation of what's involved, what's in it, the chapters. So you can see there's pretty much everything from composition, exposure, planning, equipment, settings to use, post-processing, loads of different stuff, and some testimonials from clients who've already bought that. So it might be something that you think can add value to your workflow. And yeah, you can go to that on my website. If you just go on samuelscicluna.com, there's the link there to the ebook, and you can have a look at that. And last but not least, just want to make you aware of 2 workshops that I have which are coming up. So in May next year, I'm organizing a workshop in Tuscany with Mads Peter Iversen. Those of you who follow landscape photographers on YouTube are probably familiar with Mads. He's a fantastic photographer. We've got a workshop in the Dolomites in August next year, which is meant to be this year, but it's been postponed due to COVID, which is fully booked. But there's still places for the one in Tuscany, and it's kind of like a high-end workshop with a luxury farmhouse all to ourselves, and it's a 6-day, 5-night workshop. So if you're interested in that, you can see it on my website as well. And there is also an Iceland workshop in June next year. So obviously, when I say June next year, let's hope that the situation is back to normal and that we're able to travel and continue photographing these amazing places. This workshop will be with a company which is based in Iceland, Viking International Photo Tours. So it'll be myself and another guide. It's a small group, so the same as with Mads, small groups, just to make sure you get individual attention. But we're going specifically in June for the midnight sun, so we'll make sure that we have our best chance of getting the best possible light throughout our time in Iceland. And we'll be visiting all the usual landmark sites. That is it from my end. So just on to questions now. Obviously, you can view my work there. There's my website up there as well for you to see the ebook and the review of the monitor. Just going to move on to questions now. Bear with me whilst I open up the questions. Okay. So the number one, so I've got a question from Christine here. What is the number one thing you wish you knew when you started? I think I'd say that probably you don't have to depend specifically on the equipment. So it doesn't have to be the most expensive equipment. I obviously learned that the hard way, but it's not a bad lesson to learn. So for example, the camera I use at the moment is the Nikon D810. It's, it's I think almost 5 years old now. I don't see the need to change that right now. Yes, I am tempted to change it, especially with mirrorless. And the only reason I might actually change in the near future to mirrorless is just because of the size and weight. So obviously the places I go are sometimes not very accessible. So when you're hiking into a location for 2 or 3 hours, weight makes a difference. So I might look to potentially be moving to mirrorless purely because it's smaller and lighter. Takes up less space in my bag, which means I can carry more important things like food and clothes if it's a camping trip. But I wouldn't get hung up on what equipment we have. So also from Christine, do you go alone or as a team to shoot remote locations like Iceland? So the first time I went to Iceland was as an attendee to a workshop because I wanted to improve my landscape photography. Second time I went, because I'd already been to the place obviously and had an idea, was with Christine, my partner. So we went on, it was kind of a holiday, but I also shot as much as I could. There are times when I've been with just a friend of mine. So like when I went to the Dolomites for the first time, that was just me and a friend of mine going to explore the locations. But like Iceland, I spent a week on my own there the last time I was there because I know the place well, I'm comfortable with it. It's a very safe country as well. So I had no issue staying there on my own. Question from Mark. So you did not, so very striking captures. I did not catch the name of the tracking app you use. Could you mention it again, please? So do you mean if it's the app for planning, so planning shots, it's called Photo Pills, so the yellow icon. In terms of tracking, if you're referring to like tracking the Milky Way, the actual tracker I use, the gadget is called a Move Shoot Move CIFO Rotator. And I've also actually got a review of one on the website as well, so you can have a look at what it looks like if that's what you're interested in. Okay. So Gabriel, I hope that I can pronounce this correctly. Gabriel has asked, do you use ND filters for this wood effect? Yes. I use HIDA filters those are the filters I use. It depends on the scene and what I want to achieve from the scene. I'll use anywhere from a 3-stop filter to a 6-stop or a 10-stop filter. to get the most out of the image. But it depends on what I want the image to look like. So it kind of depends on your creative vision. If you want to slow down the water in a stream, for example, you can either completely go very long, like a 30-second exposure to smooth it out, or you could use like a couple of seconds to still have some detail in the water. Same as with the sea. If you're capturing the sea swell, if you go for like a 4-minute exposure, the sea will be completely smooth. Whereas if you want to capture some light movement in the water, you can go for like a 1 or a 2-second exposure. So Eugene has asked, is winter the best time to visit Malta to make some shots? Yeah, so summer is very much clear skies in Malta. So unfortunately, it's great for the Milky Way, but it's not good for landscape. So pretty much from kind of the end of May up until the beginning of September, there's not really much to shoot in terms of landscapes because it's just clear skies and no clouds. September through November is good. February through May is also good. In summer, at least we have the Milky Way to keep us busy, so we don't completely give up the hobby. Just looking at more questions. So Eva has asked, do you use a tilt shift or just a wide angle? No, I just use a wide angle lens. I don't actually own a tilt shift lens. And so Chris asked a bit more about focus stacking. So a lot of modern cameras can focus stack on their own. I do that manually. So I would literally set up the camera in live view in front of my foreground. I'll start with the closest image first. So in live view, I will zoom into the screen, manually turn the focus until the foreground of the image is sharp and take a shot. Then keeping the same settings, I'll move to a bit further up in the image, as in a bit further away, focus on that manually and take the shot. And I just keep doing that until I'm guaranteeing everything is sharp. In regards to a link about the recording, that's been answered already. So Marina said that she uses the benQ SW2700PD and wonders what the correct luminance value is. Her heart's still in the Dolomites since the last time when she was there. And thank you for the kind words, Marina. So yeah, so I suppose there is no specific correct luminance value. It will depend a lot on the environment you're editing with. And I think the hood makes it a lot better because you can actually block out any stray light. But also, I think each monitor will be slightly different. That's why you calibrate it, because the calibrator is going to take into consideration the light falling on the monitor screen, but also the light that the monitor is creating. So when you calibrate it, you're 100% sure that it's what it should be, basically. I hope that makes sense. And Luis has said he'd like to know the name of the app presented at the beginning for planning. Again, that's Photo Pills. A yellow icon, a fantastic app for planning sunrise, sunset, and even the moon, for example, moonrise and moonset, the Milky Way itself. And I discovered this year you can also use it to actually plan meteor showers as well, which is fantastic. So Nathan has asked around companies that do astrophotography workshops in Dolomites and Iceland. So I do, Nathan, I run workshops. So in Iceland, there aren't really astrophotography workshops because the Milky Way isn't visible. The core of the Milky Way isn't visible in Iceland. In Iceland, generally you'll either get workshops which are focused on the northern lights and ice caves in winter, or the midnight sun in in June. So the midnight sun is when it never really gets dark because the sun just sets for about an hour. Everything you want to shoot has a different time. So for example, the midnight sun, or if you want that light, generally May, June and July is the best time to have those really long sunsets and sunrises. Northern lights begin to be visible in like the last week of August and about till the end of March. But ice caves aren't accessible generally until about November, and they run from November to the beginning of March. So the reason they're not accessible is because in summer they collapse, bits of them collapse quite frequently because the ice is melting. So they're only actually accessible in winter. Obviously, if it's a unusually long or cold winter, that will mean the season will stay open for longer. But in the contrary, if it's actually a very warm winter, there might be a shorter season. So, but yeah, I do organize workshops. So if you want to subscribe to our newsletter, you'll be kept made aware of all the upcoming workshops before they happen. So David has asked as well about the app. That's Photo Pills. Chris Van Twisk has asked about the information on the Iceland trip. That's on my website, Chris. So if you go to, as you can see on the screen, simonscicluna.com, there is a tab for workshops, and you can go on Iceland. So Maggie's asked how many brackets I use. So it will depend on the scene. A lot of the time, you can get away with just using 2 images. So you have 1 image for the foreground and 1 image for the sky. But sometimes, like I mentioned in the ice cave, I used 9 images for that, just because of the dynamic range. There's so much difference between bright and the bright parts and the shadows that you need to just bracket more images, basically. So Peter's asked, does stacking bracketing help to eliminate dust spots you get at higher F numbers? Well, not really, Peter. So you still want to use an aperture which is relatively, a small aperture, like for example f11, f16, when you're bracketing, because if you use the wide open aperture, you'd have to take a lot more shots because of the depth of field. Your best bet for removing dust spots is having the sensor professionally cleaned, or if you're comfortable with it, doing it yourself. So for example, I clean all of my own cameras, the sensors myself, whenever I have dust spots that need removing. I appreciate not everyone might be comfortable doing that though, so by all means, you can feel free to have it taken to a professional to have it cleaned properly if you want to. So Edgar has asked if they're all taken. Yes, they're all taken in 14-bit RAW on the Nikon D810. I only shoot RAW because I want to maintain the most possible detail. I don't want to lose any detail in the RAW file, especially with like night images and the Milky Way. There's so much detail in the RAW file. You just want to make sure that you've got all the information there. So Francesca's asked why I focus on landscape photography and not other topics. But to be honest, I love nature. I've always kind of been interested in nature, whether it's camping, whether it's rock climbing, going for hikes. So being out in the outdoors for me is a natural thing. So I just take the opportunity to kind of document my experience whilst I'm out there. In the beginning, I did try other types of photography. I tried portraits, and I've done a couple of weddings, but it just isn't my thing. This is something I'm passionate about, which is why, for me, it's not a problem to wake up at 4 in the morning and go out for sunrise, or go out, at 1 in the morning for the Milky Way and spend the whole night out awake. So Tessa's asked, for the star photos, do you bracket and either slow shutter speed, or are they one shot? So if it's like a star trail, that is a lot of different shots. If it's a Milky Way or a starscape, that'll be one shot for the sky and then a separate shot for the foreground. The reason I do it in 2 shots is I use different settings because I want to keep the highest possible quality for the foreground. If you shot the foreground at, for example, ISO 6400, you're going to have a lot of noise in there. But by reducing the ISO to, for example, 800, and instead of 30 seconds, increasing the shutter speed to 4 minutes, you're going to get a much cleaner result. Chris has asked if I shoot with drones. I used to have a drone, but I sold it because I wasn't really using it much. I thought it was a pity to have it there if I'm not actually using it. So to be honest, I'm very tempted to get another drone because I had the Mavic 1 Pro originally, and it seems to have come a long way in just the last 2 years alone. So maybe I'll get another one in future. So Francesca's asked, so she said she's a landscape architect. What is your relationship with architecture as a photographer? So some of the places I visit, so for example, Rome, London, those are beautiful places to shoot cityscapes. So you actually, your main subject is actually architecture as opposed to a natural environment. I still enjoy doing that, and I do shoot it whenever I have the opportunity to. I do shoot architecture as well, but generally my main kind of go-to would be nature and the landscape. So Paul's asked, what are my 3 go-to filters? So like I mentioned, a 3-stop ND filter, a 6-stop ND filter, and a 10-stop ND filter. And I'll just use them. I'll use the different ones depending on the light and the scene, but also depending what I want to achieve. So if I wanted to go for a really long exposure and give that feeling of tranquility and dreaminess, then I'd go with a 10-stop. If I wanted to just slow it down a bit to maybe get some streaks in the water in a seascape or in a river or a waterfall, then I'd go with, for example, the 3-stop. So Luke has said, great workshop, your color grading is always on point and consistent. Can you share some tips from Photoshop and Lightroom? So I use Lightroom and Photoshop for my post-processing. I don't use any other software. I'd say 80% of the work is done in Lightroom, and I have images which will never go into Photoshop because they don't need to. So I only use Photoshop if I'm combining, like blending images, which are all my astro shots basically, or if there's something that I need to remove. So generally when I'm on scene, if there's, for example, litter in the foreground, I'll go and I'll pick that up. It's easier to go and pick it up than it is to try and remove it later, apart from the fact that it's actually better for the environment to go and pick it up and remove, that plastic bottle or whatever it is, packet of crisps, for example. So I will use Photoshop when I need to use the clone stamp to remove things that are in the shot, or if I need to blend images. Otherwise, it's all done in Lightroom. I think the secret to getting the colors right is having a good monitor and having the monitor calibrated, so that you know that what you're seeing there is the actual colors that the people, your audience, are going to be seeing on social media, for example, or if you were to print it, that is the colors they'll see. So Keats asked what type of filters I use depending on the location. So because I blend exposures, I only use ND filters. I don't use graduated filters anymore, because of the fact that unless you have a perfectly straight horizon, you're going to be darkening any mountains or rocks that are there. So I only use neutral density filters, and I use 3, 6, and 10 stops. So Maggie asked a great question here. Do you do a test shot before you add the filters? Yes. A very important part of getting the exposure right with the filter is first taking a test shot. So if, let's say, your test shot is 1 second and your aperture is f4 and you're putting a 3-stop on, you know that your 1 second exposure is then going to go up by 3 stops if you don't change the aperture. So a 1 second exposure, if we went up by 3 stops, would become 2, 4, 8 seconds. If you then wanted to reduce the aperture, for example, from f4 to f5.6, your 8 will effectively become 16 seconds. But on cameras nowadays, it's 15 seconds. So yeah, you take a test shot to know where you stand, and you then calculate, using simple maths. Just basically every stop of light is doubling the shutter speed. So you then calculate it from there. So Teresa has asked, what is your favorite lens for aurora photography? So I use the Samyang 14mm f2.8 a lot. I do that because generally with aurora you've got the sky full of it. So 40mm, the widest possible lens on full frame, works great. I also use a 24mm f1.4 if it's more narrowed down. So I use that mostly for the Milky Way, but when there's aurora, if there's like a particular band of aurora which is really bright and I can afford to zoom in a bit, I'll use a 24mm. So Clayton's asked, do you use a trigger for lighting photography or just rely on time lapse? So when I'm shooting in full dark at night, it's consecutive 30-second exposures. So I just set up the intervalometer and the camera will shoot one exposure after the other continuously for as long as there's activity happening. The trigger is used basically during the day, when if you try to take continuous exposures and your shutter speed is only, for example, 1 second, you'd either fill up the buffer or your memory cards very quickly. So that's where it's useful. Peter asked what star tracker I use. I use the Move Shoot Move SIFO rotator. It's a fantastic little tracker because it's small and I travel with it. So there are a lot of more advanced trackers which will give you a more accurate alignment for longer, which are good for deep space observation. But the tracker I use is good because it's small, it's not too heavy, and it's lighter than a lens, to be honest, and you can just put that in your bag whenever you're traveling. So I've taken it to the Dolomites with me, I've taken it to Tuscany with me, I've taken it to plenty of places, and it's a great little tracker. I've easily got I generally aim for 4 minutes as an exposure, but I've even tried 8 minutes, which has been perfectly fine as well. So Maggie's asked when I'm planning the Goldzo workshop. So I've got a workshop in Goldzo next month. Obviously, it does depend on the current situation and whether that situation improves. Well, hopefully it doesn't get any worse. But all the information is on my website, so you can actually go on my website and have a look. It's the 13th to the 15th of November. Thank you, Chris. So Errol has asked how I process bracketed images. So I don't use an HDR software. I simply open the images in Lightroom. I'll do some basic adjustments like removing chromatic aberration and applying the lens profile correction. I'll then do some basic edits to like the highlights, the shadows, the whites and the blacks, contrast and color corrections. The important thing is that if you're measuring two photos together, that you get them to be as close as possible, so they naturally merge. If you've got one image which is much brighter than the other, for example, it's going to be hard to do that. So generally, like the sky image, I would reduce the exposure on that, and I'd increase the exposure on the foreground to try and make them match. So Chris, I shoot with a Sony a7 III with 24.4. Oh, nice. So you've got some good gear there, Chris. So Peter's asked, the 8-minute shot in the mountains with the light trails from the traffic. I have 8 minutes to use a filter, even though it's at night. No, so because it was already about, I'd say 30 minutes past sunset when I started the exposure, that's just an 8-minute exposure. I believe it was at f8, so the aperture is quite small, but I'll have to double check. So Marcus asked if I use really small apertures like f22. I would only use f22 when I want to get a sunstar, because the more you close the aperture, the more pronounced the sunstar becomes. I wouldn't use it for a general landscape purely because you're going to introduce diffraction, which effectively reduces the sharpness slightly. So I'd generally stick to f8 to f16. f22 is just for the sunstar. So if I was shooting a scene with a sunstar, I would shoot the sunstar at f22, as in that image, but I would then also shoot the rest of the frames at f16 and just blend in the sunstar with the aperture of f22 because it's a more defined sunstar. And Mark's asked, would you set lens correction in camera sort out in Lightroom? So I do it in Lightroom. It's so easy nowadays to just click the button and you know, you can automatically apply the lens correction for your particular camera and lens. And it sorts out not all of the distortion, but most of it. Sometimes you need to fix the distortions. That's another thing I'd actually use Photoshop for. If, for example, there's a shot of a building which is really distorted, sometimes automatic correction of distortion won't fix that, so you need to do that manually in Photoshop by using free transform and then just warping it to make it look as natural as possible. I think that's it from the question. Just one more. So Ronald's asked, when shooting multiple exposures, do you shoot manual or just keep shooting aperture priority? So if I'm bracketing, so it would depend. If the shot I'm capturing is specific, the shutter speed is important, then I would be focusing on keeping the shutter speed the same. I would change the aperture. But what you have to take into consideration is if you change the aperture, you're changing the depth of field, and that can affect obviously which parts of the image is in focus and not. So I would rather keep the aperture the same and just vary the shutter speed. So basically, yes, I would do it in aperture priority because it keeps the aperture the same. I always make sure I don't change the ISO in the landscape. It's always going to be base ISO of ISO 100. And then let the shutter speed vary. I think that's all the questions. Thank you very much for attending. So a copy of the webinar will be sent to you guys by video. And those of you who've attended, I believe on the initial screen, there was also a notification of a special offer discount. So just one last question came through. So Mark said he wants to get back to Iceland because the last time I was there was 80-mile-an-hour with snowstorms and couldn't see any grass. Yeah, Iceland is pretty intense for weather. You can be really lucky and have good weather, or it can be absolutely an absolute nightmare. So it's not the first time. We came into a storm where we literally had to spend the whole day at the accommodation because we couldn't go out. The roads were actually closed. So it isn't unheard of in Iceland. But Mark, you're very welcome to join one of my future trips if you're interested. And good luck, and hopefully you get good light. So Jane. Yep, so yeah, I definitely agree, Jane. Bracketing is extremely important. It's so easy nowadays, but it's the best way to get a high quality result, simply because you know, you're not trying to bring too much information out of the shadows and introducing noise. You're just using information there. So again, thank you everyone. I wish you have a lovely evening, and thanks again for attending. Feel free, like I said, to have a look at the website, and always, if you have any questions or feedback or anything at all, feel free to get in touch with me on social media or through my website. And once again, thank you, benQ, for the support and for organizing this webinar for me to reach out to you guys. So thank you very much.